where common sense fails. With your hosts, Chris and Drew. Warning, content may be hot.
Ready, go!
Are you sitting comfortably? I do hope so. Because now it's taken you 5 years of therapy to get us out of your heads and hope that you never get to hear us again. We are back. Yep, here we are, where common sense fails again. Only this time, we're starting off with a bit more of a serious take on the podcast. So those of you that know us from the past, where it was all a little bit kind of a couple of blokes down the pub, having a bit of a chat, talking about things a bit stupid, wanted to know about my dating life and the likes. Well, 5 years have gone, things have changed, we've got a bit older, and Drew's trying to make me a little bit more serious, I think, because he's only gone and lined up a chap called Noel Hadjimichael, and he's the current mayor of the Royal Borough of Kingston. A lovely guy, Australian, but we're not going to hold that against him. Yeah, I thought we'd start off with this one. We're talking things, politics, kind of just general things that are going on in the world, and throwing a few common sense failures in there as well. But it's just a start, and let's see how things go. Hope you enjoy it.
Got a podcast idea you need help with? Not sure how to publish and promote it? Get in touch with funkybearproductions.com and let us show you how we can help.
So, listeners, we've got the start of what is being called at the moment as a pilot, where common sense fails again. So we're kind of going to be discussing potentially hot topics, and we've got a couple of I've got a couple of co-hosts with me. I've got Noel. I'm afraid, Noel, you're going to have to pronounce your surname because I will only mess it up.
It's very easy. Hadjimichael, just the way it's...
Okay, so Noel Hadjimichael, thank you very much. And I'll get you to give me a little bit of a sort of bio in a couple of minutes, but I've also got, well, I say Drew Boynton, but the history I've got with this chap, I've known him as many, many different names, and I'm not quite sure every time I see him and speak to him what I should be calling him. So I'm give him the chance to introduce himself and how he wants to be known.
Yeah, let's call me Andrew for the time being. I'm sure that we'll slip up there and call myself Drew, or I'll refer to myself as Drew. So let's continue with that as Andrew. I guess it
depends on what you say. If you say something that all of a sudden is quite controversial, then people are out to cancel you. You'll soon change your name.
That's how it goes. That's
anyway,
how it rolls.
Chaps, thanks for jumping on the recording. We have in the past, listeners, gone through a number of subjects whilst we were discussing, what we're going to talk about on these podcasts, and I noticed how you two guys kind of put it on me to say, you choose the subject, Chris, and we'll just talk about it. But the whole point, I think, is like I said, is to talk about things that potentially could come over as quite controversial, and really, I just want to, I don't know, be that independent guy that might just pose a few questions that people like Noel and Andrew are going to hopefully answer and put me straight in these. But anyway, we'll see how we go. But tonight's topic was going to be all about coming over, or other borders being closed and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember what we actually decided to call it. Drew?
Yeah, let me just go back to that then. So I think it was a sense of wish you were here before it's too late. It's this idea of going to holiday in Europe or visiting Europe for work. And this conversation's, and I'm going to do a lead in here because I've known Noel for a number of years now, and I think that what prompted me to have this conversation, or to invite us in to have this conversation, was the sort of like the concept of perhaps national spend should be focusing on bullets over butter. I think I might have heard that from Mr. Hadjimichael as a term, and again, just thinking about how the UK role has changed in Europe, in potentially in NATO, and maybe that's for you and I, Chris. We grew up in this sort of like post-war period, and I think that if we were to ask Noel to sort of like unpack this a little bit more, are we sitting here in this sort of like naive sense of safety, where perhaps, growing up in the 70s, 80s, we're now in this sort of like pre-war period. And as this sort of like, middle-class male that I think we both qualify as, when we're sitting with our friends, thinking about the safety of our kids, that they're inheriting the world that we have spent an amount of time in, voting.
Well, can I just
working in business, that perhaps that there is a conversation that needs to be had.
Before we get into the actual topic, if you don't mind, for I guess full disclosure, let's just give people a minute or so of background as to where we've all come from. Okay,
yeah.
So you take myself for example. I'm Chris. I have recently come out of business. I had a small data business which I sold, and I am now, believe it or not, in the business of producing podcasts. So for my sins, I'm out there trying to sort of come up with some interesting subject matters and get the message out there to the rest of the world. So that's where I come from. I'm not politically aligned with anybody or anything else. I'm literally just someone who has an interest in the general, news of today. And I have my own opinion. And that's as pretty much as political as I get. Noel, introduce yourself.
Well, what a fantastic segue, Chris. I'm a little bit like you, and I'm a little bit like Andrew. No, we're not all three white guys of a certain age, but we are also, I think, all ideas people. My career has been diverse. You can hear the Australian accent. I've spent the last decade living in Britain. I arrived with my wife 100 days before Brexit, so the vote. So thank you very much for putting on a fantastic show. I've lived through the ups and downs of that soap opera, and full respect to the people who have survived this in serious jobs. I've worked in the civil service. I started my working life in the military, in the Navy in Australia. I've been a lawyer. I've taught university, but there's been one golden thread, and it's been all about having conversations, investing in young people, and being involved in the national interest. And this type of podcast is vital for Britain, because if we can't talk about things that bother us, we can't even take the first steps to doing something about it. So I see this as absolutely a good turn. We are doing something which is actually going to...
And
also, Drew knows me as the ultimate Luddite. As he is technology, I am old school retro.
Okay, well, before Drew, you jump in, we'll maybe just pick on a few things there, Noel, because I agree, I guess the UK does need this kind of style of podcast. The only thing that concerns me a little bit, and maybe we'll come on to this later, is do we have true freedom of speech? Because with this new government that's come in, certain people have been locked up for saying hurty words on Facebook. So who knows? Let's hope we get to a second episode. And on that note, Andrew, off you go.
Yeah, obviously I'm Andrew, previously known as Drew, co-host with Chris on Where Common Sense Fails. And I think I'm of a particular age, born in the late 60s. I'm currently working in technology, in automotive at the moment. And I think it's worthwhile me just sort of like linking up the golden thread between myself and Noel. I had the good fortune of meeting Noel down in London at the National Liberal Club with his fantastic project called the DSC. And I think, Noel, let's talk about that at some point. But yeah, Drew, really excited to be here and agree with Noel that these types of conversations do need to be had. And I guess my position has been informed from some of the great conversations that Noel's hosted at the DSC, at the National Liberal Club down in Whitehall, London. So yeah, I think that, for me, this is a continuation of that, those types of conversations that maybe more aligned with some of the questions you've got, Chris, and see if we can permeate your bubble.
Okay, well,
with some of these great topics that I intend to bring up and start talking about.
So I mean, from my perspective, you touched on this kind of bubble that I'm in. I must admit, since gosh, now it's nearly 2 years since I sold my business, and I've pretty much just had 2 years of enjoying myself. I've traveled the world. I don't really want to think about things that are going wrong all the time, because there's too much of that going on. Every time you seem to switch the news on, it's depressing. And you kind of sit there and think, there used to be a time on like things like the news at 10 back in the 80s and the 90s where they used to have, and now for something a bit lighter, and they'd always finish the news with a bit of fun. And that seems to have gone out the window, and it's as if we're all kind of being bombarded with bad news all of the time. Okay, so we're either living, like I say, in a bubble where we're denying that kind of things are actually happening, or things are actually happening and we just don't like facing up to the truth. Now, I'm sure over the next few weeks there's going to be some topics that we're going to be discussing that I'm certainly going to be sitting there going, I don't believe you. And it's your jobs, you two, to sit there and dispel those kind of myths and to actually come up with some concrete evidence that, should we be worried about the topics that we're talking about, or is it sort of bunkum? Because if I'm being honest, I must admit, years ago I used to think the BBC were the best news service in the world, and I would believe everything that they would tell me. However, in the last I must admit, in the last 4 or 5 years, people like the BBC, people like Fox News, people like Channel 4 News, seem to be just peddling a bunch of fear-mongering stuff. So I'd be interested to get you two guys' takes on that. But what I am interested in, because I don't have the benefit of the sort of background to Noel and yourself, Andrew, in terms of what you guys have been talking about down at the DSC, did you call it? So do you want to enlighten me and listeners as to maybe what that is?
Okay, well, 5 years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, I did something revolutionary. I decided to have an idea and to follow through on it, rather than sit at home and do my compulsory 1 hour a day sanctioned by government walk around the neighbourhood. So because I attended think tanks that are associated with Britain, Chatham House, that many people know with that term, Chatham House Rules, which is very related to the Foreign Office, RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, down in Whitehall, which is literally next door to the MOD, the Ministry of Defence main building. I've been to political things, I've been to right-wing and I've been to left-wing think tanks, listening to fantastic people. But you go there, it's the daytime, it's the middle of the day. Most of the audience looks like me. Most of the audience is there because the office has sent them, their workers sent them, and I created something which is for everyone, especially younger people, especially women, especially people who are in early to mid-career. and they could do it on their own time at no cost. And it's called the Defence and Security Circle. So in Whitehall, in a location within 10 minutes from so many places where people work, or a quick tube ride from the City of London or from some embassies, people get together for conversations about the national interest, in the national interest. And Drew and others, and no disrespect to Drew, the average person doesn't look like him. She's about 37. She could be a scientist at Cambridge. She could work in the Cabinet Office. She could be a major in the army. One of the young guys could be easily the sort of person who grew up in Nottingham or Sheffield and is now a fantastic Met officer in London. Or they could be somebody from the arts, from the media, or from industry. It's getting a mix of people in the room to think about, talk about, discuss the challenges Britain faces. And I think what you're doing, Chris, by bringing those challenges into this space, you're reaching people who physically can't be in Whitehall for an hour in person. You're bringing the story, the narrative, the conversation to them, to their device, in their own time.
But just the nature of what it's called, Noel, sounds scary, right? So when these people turn up, are you discussing scary things?
Well, I don't know if you could call it scary. I think you could call it meaningful.
Right.
So we're talking about what you would expect from a defence think tank, or we call it a talk tank because we don't do the research, we just bring the research into the room. We look at security issues, we look at geopolitics, but we do a lot of technology, cyber, AI, secure information systems. 5 years ago, it was probably a little bit flaky, a little bit tinfoil hat to suggest that somebody could cut the undersea cables linking countries and linking the internet. The idea of some countries having, let's say, junk up in space that can shoot down other people's satellites, that was a little bit out there. But we've also tackled social issues, racism, misogyny, social cohesion. We've touched upon some of the big issues, Ukraine, Gaza, Taiwan, and we've also dealt with the personal, PTSD, mental health. What happens, 10 years, 20 years after being the victim of a terrorist attack, both as a rescue or emergency service. You're on a bus, you're on a tube, you're in the street, and you've witnessed something. So we've, even though defence and security sounds very serious, it's more about being meaningful. And
in terms of verifying it and making sure that, again, apologies for it coming over as it's going to sound now, but, I don't want it to, how do I know it's not just a bunch of crackpot people, with their own little ideas sitting in a room going, well, yeah, absolutely, the world's going to end. And what I'm trying to get to is, are these seasonal people experts from their fields of areas that you're talking about, cross-party, all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think there's a bit of a trick. The trick is to rely on many voices, not a single voice. The good thing about being the Switzerland of Whitehall, as somebody once called us, is that everyone comes to the table.
Yeah.
So you've got people in the room who know as much about the topic as the person who's speaking. Often the format is not talking at you, but talking with you. We've even done that old Jerry Springer take the microphone into the audience routine. So, as they say, may he rest in peace, he was a fantastic showman in many ways in terms of process. what we've done also is we've often found voices that are rising. 92 out of 155 speakers in 115 events have been women. You don't find that traditionally in defence, security or tech. It's all about a bunch of blokes of a certain age or of a certain style. We've also had diversity in life experience, and we've done some challenging stuff. We've brought people who don't get on. Now, I'm not going to mention their names, I don't want to embarrass them, but we've brought 2 think tank leaders who don't necessarily get together, and they came together to tackle the one topic. Now, let's call one Pepsi and one Coke. Normally, they wouldn't be within a mile of each other. Because I'm a persuasive chap, and also we are the Switzerland of Whitehall, they came together to tackle something that needed to be addressed. So in some ways, you're right to be cynical. I'm incredibly cynical because I have a background in narrative warfare and information warfare. Propaganda, there's a fantastic line, and yes, it is in a movie, but it's actually from real life. When someone once said in a 1940s war movie, the only thing you can trust in the news is the cricket score.
Right.
Hampshire actually did beat Surrey. Everything else, in theory, could be a little bit curated. And that's why having conversations that are tested and challenged is very important.
How do these people come, or do you find them? Do they find you, or do you find them?
Well, we used to go out and find people, but now they're coming to us. They come from embassies, from other think tanks, people, friends who have been in the room. We've had 4,000 people who have attended events, including a couple of lovely people from a certain embassy east of Poland, a country which is, of course, a very interesting place. But most of the time, people have come to us and said, we have a story to tell. Would you be interested? And our job is to often take that story and challenge.
Okay, so again, full disclosure, right? You're not funded by anybody.
No, the best thing about my wife is that she's lent me to Britain. So I'm a terrible housewife. And full disclosure also from me, well, it's always good. Prince Philip and I both married up, so I'm very, very comfortable about that. I'm a very, very little politician, and I'm wearing my orange book Liberal tie. So I have a very small income from politics, but the politics is let's call it one day a week. It's, what I do on the side. Doing these conversations, it's all designed at no cost. It costs nothing to run it. I have the support of the National Liberal Club where I'm a member. None of the speakers are paid. There's no Exxon Foundation. There's no... I do have to admit that I was a bit cheeky. We wanted to do a conference. Yeah. There was the possibility of getting some funding from NATO. I wanted to see, could we get more money than a couple of Russell universities? And we did. We put in a good bid. We got 15,000 euros. I'll tell you, 15,000 euros doesn't go far if you want to have 200 people in the conference. But we did a show 6-7 weeks before the Russian invasion of Donbass and mainstream, mainland Ukraine. And so, yes, as a one-off, we've had some NATO money. We're friends with NATO because we exist to understand and support the national interests.
But you're not a mouthpiece for NATO, though. All right.
No.
Okay. I'm just getting it out there.
I would be paid much more.
I just want people to be aware of that, just in case they're listening in, thinking, "Oh yeah, I've heard this before." He's in bed with NATO, and he's just going to start pushing their agenda. So you're completely independent from that perspective.
Well, I think the good thing is I'm a bit like the Armenian uncle at the wedding. I have opinions. I sit on table 17. Yeah. I'm nowhere near the bride and the groom, but I did bring them together.
Right.
And I'm a big believer in having conversations, and Britain is big enough, mature enough, and also I think resilient enough to have some really tough conversations.
Well, okay. So listeners, I think, as you probably can take, listening to what you Noel's been saying, I'm excited, I think, anyway, thinking about what's going to come in the next few weeks, because I think, this is really the first time, well, second time now I've spoken to Noel. And I think, there's going to be a lot of thought and conversation around some interesting topics. And I want to get back to that. I want to get back to what we initially were going to discuss, if that's okay. So, we called it Book Now Before the Borders Close as our title. Right. I guess from that perspective, Noel, and again, it's about our borders, I guess, and about the fact that certainly, I wouldn't say I know a huge amount about it, but certainly from what I've read over the last sort of 18 to 24 months is, okay, so since we came out of Brexit, as you mentioned a few years ago now, and we are now limited to how long we can freely move around Europe. So I, for example, go to Spain quite a lot. I have a place over in Spain, but I can only go there for 180 days, every 6 months, because of the sort of the rules around free movement in Europe. However, if you are in Europe or you're a tourist, you are free to move wherever you want to go around Europe, or at least you used to. And I think what I'm now seeing and what I've read in the past is places like Germany, places like Portugal, places like France, kind of shutting down their borders a little bit, or not shutting them down as much, but doing more border checks. And maybe, we had this whole, is it I can't pronounce it, Schengen zone or something, which was this whole, which is this whole kind of free movement thing that seems to be getting eroded a little bit. Now, am I right in assuming that? Is there any proof in this happening? Should we be worried about it? Because again, we also hear about our UK government trying to get closer now to Europe so that we can have sort of free movement again, but only for like young people. So where do we stand at the moment?
Okay, well, I'm happy for Drew to come in on this, because I'm going to be really upfront and say that it depends what passport you have, and it depends what era you're talking about. Most people in the world have a limit to how long they can spend in a country that they visit. Visit may be for holidays, visit may be to see family, visit may be even with a working visa. There are time limits, there are rules. The United Kingdom, as part of the EU, had one of those great freedoms, and it was that freedom to live, to work, and to engage in each other's societies. You could go to Spain, you could go to France, you could go to Latvia, you could go to Germany, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. People could come, and Polish people could come and work here, live here, be part of our society. That's changed, but it doesn't surprise me that governments have rowed back on border checks, because there's terrorism, there's also a desire to respond to community concerns about mass migration, about large numbers. Germany took in several million people from Syria, but within that number were thousands and thousands of other people who came from other parts of the Middle East, as far away as Afghanistan. Lots of people were undocumented. There were lots of challenges for Germany. Interestingly, this flow of people, many of whom did qualify for asylum as legitimate recognised refugees, but some of whom also had characteristics of economic migration, lots of young men wanting to escape war zones, but also wanting to start a life in the West as economically active people.
Can I pick in on that? So if you look at I last year I went to Japan, for example, and it blew me away, the culture in Japan. And one thing that struck me in Japan was there was no graffiti, there was no kind of people shouting in the streets. They didn't even have their phones on, and talk to people on the underground. Certainly not like around here, for example, now, where people seem to be talking into the phones and having them on speaker and invading everyone else's space. And it struck me that they were very respectful, the Japanese. Okay, and I traveled all the way around Japan, and it blew me away at how polite they were to each other, how they respected each other. And then when I looked into it, they have less than 3% immigration in Japan. Right. I then saw something and I don't know how true this was and how much propaganda this was, but I saw the Polish Prime Minister say, do you know what? We have no threats from Islamic groups or from terrorists or whatever in Poland. How many terrorist attacks do you hear about in Poland? And I was like, well, I never hear of them. He says, because we don't allow that many people in. And you kind of start sitting there and thinking, do they have a point here? Because there's no problem in having immigrants coming in as long as they're economically active. Okay, because I think everybody could benefit from that. Everyone can benefit from getting those people in. I'm not saying we should close all borders, but is that potentially what the problem is, though, we've got here? Because so many people have just come into Germany and to France and to the UK, have we let too many in?
Well, it's the sort of question that you hear down the pub. It's the sort of question people might talk about over a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
But the reality is, you're talking to somebody who originally was born in a country that is an immigrant country. A country like Australia, a country like Canada, countries that have people from more than 170 recognised origins. And that's been an enormous success story for those societies. Parts of Europe have had long-term significant immigration and emigration outflow as well. Remember, of course, Britain exported millions of people in the post-period to America, Canada, South Africa, New Zealand and Australia. France exported and then imported people. Countries realistically have these challenges, and it's all about generations. It's all about affluence. It's also about perception. Japan doesn't have a lot of people who are not Japanese living in their society, but that's an historic hangover from certain practices and approaches. It's very difficult to say if one is better than the other, because yes, there could be less graffiti in Japan, but there could be more work-related stress, which has led to poor health. Every society has stressors. Every society has challenges. What I think we need is to go to somebody like Andrew. I mean, Drew is the tech solution type of guy. So many things that are happening now, tech seems to be the go-to place to say, how can we do things better? I mean, I've seen people not learn another language, but use the translation apps on their phones incredibly successfully.
And I'm one of them when I'm in Spain. I do that when I'm in Spain because, I haven't learnt the language.
So I'm going to pick up the talking stick from what Noel's saying there, and I'm just going to reflect on what's happened there. Is that, Chris, you asked a really probably a series of questions there that's on many people's lips, and they don't necessarily talk about it at all. They don't necessarily talk about it over a beer, but some do talk about it over a beer, or because it's a safe space between their mates over a beer, or even over a cup of coffee. And I think that it's these types of questions are incredibly sensitive to different communities in different parts of the world, and I think that these types of questions and these types of answers are often hijacked for people's own personal, political, or even social bias. And I think that as we're talking about, is that there's not necessarily no one right answer, and technology isn't necessarily going to even give us the right outcome. What is really important is that we approach these conversations with an open mind, declaring our own, and again, the idea of having these biases, because everything is a bias. It's an overused term, potentially misunderstood. But having the ability in the way that we're doing now is to say, we need to have these. We do need to have these questions. We do need to look to politicians. We do need to look to the media and the news agencies and going, are you giving me information that is affirming my bias, like the algorithms will do, because technology is being hijacked?
I think absolutely, but is this the reason? But is this the reason why? Going back to the title of the podcast, is this why these borders are being potentially shrunk down and more checks happening and everything else? Why is that happening?
Well, I think that people are feeling less secure.
Well, it's not. Hey, it's not me. It's not Joe Public who's feeling. Yeah, we might be sitting there saying that. It's the governments that control the borders.
Well, So is the government being hijacked by national opinion because they want to retain the vote? I think probably so. Are people being influenced either by technology firms to go there and hijack some of the opinions to say this is really important? I don't know. I mean, perhaps Noel can respond to some of the things that I'm leading in there about who could potentially be influencing Joe Public that influences the government.
But just to throw something out there, which is, especially in the UK, I can't speak about all the other countries, but I only saw on the news yesterday that 5 guys have been arrested in Rochdale for terrorism and planning a plot to bomb somewhere, in the UK. Are we seeing more of that happening? I'm not trying to scaremonger, but are we seeing more of that happening? I.e., are people planning to attack us from within? Or is that just? Am I trying to scaremonger there, or are we literally getting to the point where governments are now starting to say, we need to hold back? So this open border policy from a few years ago, was that too much?
Well, I think it's all about definitions. It's also all about understandings. Somebody's open border is another person's frictionless good economics. It's a bit like there's this great term which is meaningless but meaningful called globalization. If you ask somebody from economics or from transport or logistics, what does globalisation mean? They might answer lots of products made in one country, shipped across the other side of the world for the benefit of another society at the right price, at the right time, with the right tech and the right pricings. Another version of globalisation was more people being able to move more freely for economic reasons, for tourism reasons, for lifestyle reasons. There's no surprise, not wishing to make a point as a former Australian, as they say, well, still an Australian, but don't want to be too harsh. But very few people go and retire in sunny Yorkshire. They go and retire in sunny Spain or Portugal or the south of France or parts of Tuscany or even Greece. It's a bit like the reality is that governments are responding to what the media, what the public, what industry, and what their security and policing and border bureaucrats are saying. Do we need to have maybe a better system? We always need to have tomorrow's system better than today's system, which is hopefully better than yesterday's system.
But where do you stand? Hang on, where do you stand though? I mean, because I'm a believer in diversification, right? So, because I believe it can bring good, both in an economic perspective, but where do you stand when that maybe goes a little bit too far, where people might go into Germany or the UK or Spain or whatever and expect to have their culture in someone else's country? I would never dream of going somewhere and going, well, just because I believe in this and I'm now in China or I'm in Japan or whatever, and say I now want my culture to be in Little Britain in Japan, for example. I would never dream of that. I would go there and expect to be respectful of what that culture is. Now, I just feel at the moment when you go around these European countries, they seem to be losing their identity.
Well, it's always the yes and the no. You talk to young people, I call anyone under about 35 young, and I talk to my kids, 4 people under the age of 30. It's a very globalised or global youth culture.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also local, national variation. Yes, the music, the clothes, the food, the activities, the vibe of what they're on about is very, very common. It's influenced by a global popular culture, education, media, and a whole range of values. You'll find that most young people around the world in Western countries or Western-orientated countries share some very common values and very common perspectives. It could be about human rights, it could be about LGBT respect, it could be about the environment. It's amazing how boomers can get into real trouble if you don't recycle properly from people who are 27 and a little bit holier than thou on the odd bin day. But the reality is that cultures do evolve. Britain is a different country now than 50 or 100 years ago. But it is what
absolutely.
It is.
But
the fact that the national meal, the best meal or the most common meal that people will go out is to go and get
absolutely.
That wasn't the case 50 years ago or 60 years
so
ago.
do we therefore have to say, well, do you know what, let's redefine what the culture of the UK is, or redefine what the culture of some other European countries are? Because I was also reading the other day, I think your neck of the woods, is it New Zealand are looking to bring in a ban on social media for people under the age of 16? because again, they're getting influenced by worldwide social media, and apart from the mental health issues that it's going to cause, that again could be influencing people's culture.
That's true. Governments can be a little bit like King Canute, and they can try to stop the tide coming in or make a powerful symbolic gesture. Some people have also said ban smoking for people based on their birthday, so that at some stage in the future, people who are 47 won't be able to smoke, but people who are 48 can. It's one of those creeping bits of social and health policy. The best answer to any problem is to look and see what other people do, but then ask yourself the question, is it right for us? And a good example is, would I want an American-style health system here in Britain? No. Do I want a better health system than the NHS? Yes. Do I, 10, 15 years ago, would I have wanted a German-style railway in Britain? Absolutely. Deutsche Bahn was on time and perfect. Do I want Deutsche Bahn now? Having experienced it in the last year or two, probably not. So things do shift. I mean, Andrew's in the innovation space. Andrew's in the science tech space. Things that were just ideas or were in the movies some years ago are now reality.
Absolutely.
The warfare in Ukraine reminds me of the warfare in the first Terminator movie.
Yeah.
And yet people are still decapitating people with shovels in a trench. The fact that there's a drone above them with vision and with the ability to drop a payload of several grenades onto an individual soldier or position, is something which is revolutionary. The swarm technology that people are talking about, the People's Liberation Army Navy, which is a fantastic title for a navy. The fact that you can send 1,000 or 1,500, let's call them a bit like bees, out to swamp an aircraft carrier group that the Americans might have in the Pacific. It's not one missile. It's not another ship. It's not an aircraft or a squadron of aircraft. How do you defeat 1,500 potential killers of a very big ship?
Okay, so here's something, and it's slightly off topic, but and we might discuss it in more detail in a future episode. But because you've mentioned about American warships, and everything else, are we not, as Europeans, I'm going to term it, are we not at risk in general? Because if America decide to not support us as they have done in the past, and 2 or 3 weeks ago, looking at people like Starmer and other European leaders running around panicking because they actually haven't been putting enough of their money into defense, are we therefore exposed to the likes of Putin, who can sit there and go, well, do you know what, this might actually play into my hands here? Because if America are just going to go, well, pay for it yourselves, everybody, and we've all gone, bugger, what are we going to do? Are we not exposed that way as well? I mean, is the world a dangerous place at the moment?
So, Chris, let's just pause on that button, on that question right now, or hit the pause button on that question, because I've been following this conversation with interest in the idea of our borders being influenced or being penetrated by, let's say, individuals or states that want to do us harm. Are we at the moment at risk by our borders being influenced by current states, by let's say adoption or exploitation of technology, or the manipulation of technology, or even the manipulation of data. So I was lucky enough to be at the DSC a couple of weeks back, listening to a great speaker, Susie, around AI, and we were talking, or she was talking about the nature of how AI could be manipulated by, let's say, injecting data that is erroneous and can create. So Noel, what's your thoughts here? Have our borders already been penetrated by these foreign states or individuals? Is social media being hijacked? Because again, I've had the opportunity of listening to a DSC conversation around, let's say, it's a bit aged now, human farms using social media to influence other individuals. So where are we with regards to security, with regards to data, technology, and our borders being less secure? And what's the national interest doing about that?
Okay, well, I'm going to follow up on Chris's point first.
Okay.
He did lay down a really interesting question. Are we more unsafe now? And the answer is always going to be sort of. Because
that's clear.
This is the, but I'll get to the answer. The reality is, what is safe versus what is unsafe. We've always had people who want to do us harm, either because they're competitors, or they have a different geopolitical perspective, or ideologically they're opposed to our society, or we're in the way. Poland was in the way for the expansion of Nazi Germany. Britain and France went to war in 1939 to defend Poland, but then did very, very, very little because they argued they couldn't do anything. And one could say that right now, it's not that things are more unsafe, it's just that the risks involved, the threats involved, the drama that's coming or is currently here is more visible. We've seen the theft of 300 metres of copper wiring, which led to 11 or was it 15,000, they don't know the number possibly, the Spanish railway system having people overnight in freezing, difficult conditions on trains because the rail system was sabotaged. We have our companies in countries like Britain, America, Canada, Germany, having constant thousands upon thousands of cyber attacks a day. The technology has allowed this to happen, but there has to be intent.
Well,
at one stage,
what happened? I mean,
at one stage, what did Fukuyama say? End of history. We've won the Cold War. Let's just build a successful globalized economy and let's deal with other issues like the environment and social values. Well, not every country went down that road. China's a superpower with superpower military strength, with an expansionist perspective. They want Taiwan. They've said they want Taiwan. They bully their neighbours in the South China Sea. And if I was Mongolia, if I was Asiatic Russia, I wouldn't necessarily be that comfortable. Look at Russia, a rogue state, a hostile state, no friend of the United Kingdom. But 25 years ago, even 15 years ago, people were thinking that Russia and Europe, Russia and the Anglosphere could get along. So I think, Chris, you've asked the question, are we more unsafe now? My argument would be it's a little bit more visible that there is safety concerns, there are threats, and also the world is moving at a faster pace. Technology is one of the reasons, economics is the other. I'm sure people of a certain age still remember the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, 2010, depending on which country you're in. There isn't a straight line to this. Did I expect a land war in Ukraine, which is part of Europe, European landmass? No. Did I expect the Black Sea to be full of warfare? No. But I also didn't expect undersea cables in the Baltic and in other locations to be damaged or cut. I didn't expect the attempted killing by poisoning of the Skripals in Salisbury. Did people expect that a Russian defector would be on the hit list, the kill list for Russia? Absolutely.
And can I ask a question then? I mean, on
the behaviour to imperil thousands of other people in Salisbury? No.
We talk about. I mean, you've touched on things like, underwater cables and stuff, and I keep hearing a lot being bandied around about, we need to have our own food security or our own energy security, and then only last week there I was in Spain, and we had a complete blackout. The whole of the electricity and everything else in Spain for 12 hours went down. We could not get mobile phone signals. We couldn't do anything. Everyone was in the dark. And the conspiracy theories that started sprouting up, that it was the Russians, it was whatever. But I don't think they've come to a conclusion there. But what did scare me a little bit there was apparently it was to do with the European grid. And I didn't even know all these countries were connected. And it was something to do with, they say, the connection between France and Spain. And
I mean, I'm sure that, as they say, history will show that information will come out over a period of time. There'll be multiple reasons, but if it was sabotage, if it was hostile state behaviour, if it was just a completely reckless bit of bad tech that happened, something coded the wrong thing, if something broke, in the end, it's not that it happened and who was the active participant. It's the fact that we've become very vulnerable because of our lifestyle. I mean, the Nordics, the Baltics are telling people not to have food and water for 72 hours. They're telling people to have food and water for 2 to 6 weeks, probably 2 weeks of water and about 6 weeks worth of food that doesn't need gas, doesn't need electricity, doesn't need the internet. Have a cranked up radio or a radio that has batteries. Don't assume the government's going to come and help you. We've seen in today's media, today that we're doing this show, straight after the VE Day commemorations on the bank holiday. One of the big stories on one front page was the resilience handbook, or the resilience policy document needs to be upgraded because it hasn't been upgraded comprehensively for 20 years. It's page 8 in one paper, it's page 1 in another paper. That's not the point. The fact that we're having these conversations about should you have water, should you have food, should you assume that you're going to have to be resilient. A classic example would be if we fell into something like a war or a conflict situation, would our logistics, would our public health, would our public safety be normal? Or would things not be reliant? Would things go wrong at some stage? And one of the ways to protect yourself is for maybe 15% of the population to have basic to reasonable first aid. In 1940, 1950, probably 1 in 6 Britons who are adults had reasonable first aid skills because of a job they've done, because they've done war service, because they've been in the scouts or the guides with St John's Ambulance and some church group, and they'd learnt enough first aid to help. I don't know if 1 in 6 adult Britons would have the confidence, let alone the skills, to help others in first aid. So that's a really basic, what do you do?
But in your opinion, Noel, should we be more worried or more concerned? You know, you mentioned those articles that are in the national press here in the UK. You know, are we, or should we be taking it as a threat and take it a bit more seriously than we are?
Well, I'm probably the person who you would expect to say, yes, you should give thought. Why do I say that? It's no person wants conflict. No person wants alarm. No person truly would want people to be concerned and anxious. But the reality is, we do live in challenging times, fast-moving times. Things can go wrong. We saw in the pandemic that global travel, global logistics, the economics of a world economy were impacted very, very quickly. And also systems were overcome. I remember those early days when we saw the Italian health system in northern Italy come under intense pressure with the pandemic. We have to recognise that this isn't a time for alarm, but it is a time to be alert. We have to start taking some personal responsibility. We have to listen to some credible voices, and governments also have to play their role. A little bit more candour is always better than less, but maybe I have a bias. Yeah. I actually think it's better to bring people with you rather than surprise them at the very last minute. So
again, Noel, just to go back on a reference you made about Terminator and the films and how the war in Ukraine is thinking that. Do you know what? That got me thinking while you mentioned that, you know, and trying to tie it into our subject matter, which is, are the borders gonna close? Who's to say that we don't all go down the total recall route and we don't actually leave the country at all? We'll just be plugging in our holidays. We'll just be sitting there and having those thoughts plugged into our memories, and we end up all just staying in our own country.
Well, Chris, I think you're showing your age, like myself, prove that most young people wouldn't remember that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. They'd be hard-pressed to remember who Arnold Schwarzenegger was, or is, as they say. Let's call it the social dilemma is that tomorrow we don't have an idea what tomorrow will bring, but we do have an idea of what tomorrow might look like, but also we have an idea of how we'll respond. Now, Britain's a fantastic country with a lot going for it. I was incredibly proud that it was the Oxford vaccine team that cracked the vaccine challenge. Britain has a very professional medical scientific community. We do arts and culture at platinum level. We've got some of the best social values in terms of inclusion, respect, and managing successful diversity. Other countries look to Britain as a good example. We're not best in class, but we've done a reasonable job. And we have a great heritage. In all of the really big challenges, Cold War, Second World War, First World War, the Industrial Revolution, social welfare, the National Health Service, Britain's often taken a moral and credible stance. We went to war in 1914 because a small country that we promised to protect their neutrality, Belgium. A small country that was very different to us, very much a Catholic continental country. Most people had never met a Belgian in their lives. And Britain lost over 1 million men and also pretty much bankrupted itself on principle. We went to war in 1939 for Poland, and Britain and its Commonwealth was at war from day one to the last day victory over Japan in 1945. We stayed the distance. We again bankrupted ourselves, and we lost our superpower status. But in the Cold War, we also were at the cutting edge. We pushed for the right values. So I think Britain's up to any challenge. I think it's going to be the 25 and 35-year-olds who will make this happen. I spend a lot of my time surrounded by young people, and I'm never disappointed. I don't like their music. I think their clothes are not my style. I can't imagine ringing somebody or using the internet to bring some food to my home. I'll just cook it in my kitchen. That they live a different life.
But
that they've got.
But what do you think to Starmer then making that commitment initially about putting boots on the ground in Ukraine to help them out, and then kind of rode back on it because we don't have enough people in the forces?
Well, we will never have enough people ever.
Right.
It's, do we have the right number of people in the right spot? We have a battle group in Estonia. Our cyber, our air and our naval operations are deeply respected. We've got an aircraft carrier group that's now gone to the Far East, and that's part of Britain's projection of power. We're a great country because we're stubborn, and because when push comes to shove, we do often harness talent, skill, technology, and good policy. I mean, Britain's got social and soft power. Unlike most countries, we have relationships across the world, globally, and I think the Prime Minister is always going to be criticised for saying something and then not so much changing his mind, but placing a different emphasis. Is Britain committed to Ukraine? All the major political parties, the general British population, are very supportive of Ukraine. Do we want British troops in Ukraine? Most people are cautious. But do we want Britain to do the right thing in terms of values? I think most people, the majority of Britons, especially adult Britons, say over 30, have some fairly firm views. This last weekend, we took great pride in VE Day. Nothing's perfect about Britain, but we looked back on being major contributors to defeat fascism. I just don't see Britain losing heart.
Okay, well, I mean that's interesting. Gentlemen, I'm conscious that we are an hour and a half into this now, and we could chat all night, I think. But I think I want to start drawing this to an end now. So I'm going to give you both 30 seconds to summarise and give me a takeaway based on our subject matter, which was, do we move around before the borders close? Do we think borders are going to get closed down, or it's going to get tougher to move around freely? So I'm going to start with you, Noel. You've got 30 seconds just to give us a synopsis on that, and what's your thought on it?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. I think that societies and governments are going to be cautious and careful about their borders. But we are Europeans. We are great NATO friends to the countries surrounding us. And Britons will still be able to reach our friends.
Okay, that's good. That's. I take that as a positive, actually, Noel. So, okay, you've not scared me with that one. So, do I dare go to Andrew, because he might be the doom monger and he might put a different spin on it. So, Andrew, 30 seconds. What do you think about our borders closing down? Should we get out there quickly? Are we all going to be condemned to staying in our own places? You got 30 seconds. Away you go.
Right, can you hear me first of all?
Yes, just about.
Okay, good stuff. Right, okay. So I think in summary, our borders are safe. They've probably been safer than they've been for a very long time. Should we be wary of what information we listen to, where we consume the information, and what we do with the information? So I think that we should be applying critical thinking to everything that we see, everything that we hear, and ultimately really understand why we're doing what we do, our behaviour with regards to our response to the news, our response to any voting.
Right.
So be really
You only
open-minded.
had 30 seconds.
I know.
You're now 50 seconds in.
Well, it's not like me to not push the boundary a little bit. So,
Right,
yeah,
well,
thank you for holding the
I'm going to
boundary.
give you my take on it, guys. You have to listen to me now, because I think we
Sure.
have got to worry about our borders, because I don't think our borders are that secure.
Yeah.
So I'm of different opinion to what you just said there, Drew. I do think we need to be tougher in what we do. I think we have too many open borders at the moment. I think in general, I think we just need to be wary. Yeah. I think we need to invest more in defence. I think we need to get tighter and stop open borders. And there you go. That's all I'm going to say. Right. So, gentlemen, I think I've enjoyed this. Noel and Andrew, I could talk for hours and listen. I've really enjoyed it. But I'm conscious that we need to cram this down into something that other people are going to listen to.
Loved what you've heard on this week's episode? Well, the answer is simple. It would mean the world to us if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review and feedback. Spreading the word really is the best way to grow our podcast and achieve even greater things. Thank you.
To get in touch, leave us a WhatsApp voice note on +44 7503 061 799. That's +44 7503 061 799. Or text us on the same number.
Brought to you by Funky Bear Productions. Follow us on our socials @Funky Bear Productions.